Okay, we are live. Let's go. Shout out Montezuma. Cheers. Blue says, let's go. Finger red number 1. Lil Pop Tart says he was abducted by Chris Mellon. Pray for Pop Tart. Stone Ape is worried about Pop Tart. Coin Exchange, when you think you're late, but the actual party hasn't started yet. Yes, sir. Hey Ocean, Heart Panda, we heart you back. Analog Stick, damn man, about time. It's been weeks. I know, right? And I'm still editing my Spielberg documentary, but on this channel, the backup channel, we're going to be a little more loose, a little more flowy, and we're going to have just solid single stories, kind of like this one we're covering today. We're joined with Tim. How you doing, Tim?
Doing good. Thanks for having me, Panda.
Yeah, it's a pretty big story. So I'm just going to give you guys the broad topic of what we're talking about here. So Lue Elizondo, as we all know, friend of the show, recently testified before Congress. And, you know, he did get some flack from people like Congresswoman Luna and some others that kind of like he was not much happened. But something kind of really big happened that I think might have went under the radar that I do want to cover. Oh, shout out Eric too. Is he more or less, in like the most way he can do it without actually doing it himself, he names this guy, Glenn Gaffney, as a gatekeeper of the UFO legacy program and crash retrieval. So what do I mean by that? Well, Lue Elizondo has a few media proxies that are close to him that have at various times accused Mr. Gaffney of being, one, part of the legacy UFO crash retrieval program, of preventing OSAP during the Bigelow days from getting UFO materials from Lockheed Martin, and even as recently as being a secret advisor to Sean Kirkpatrick. Now, Lue has laundered this information via proxies like Matt Forward and the Liberation Times' Christopher Sharp. But it got a little more intense where during his congressional testimony, which we will cover, he mentions this supposed preventing of UFO material transfer. He mentions it. He doesn't name Glenn Gaffney, but what he does after the fact, after his hearing, there's a window where people who testify before Congress can add more supplementary information to their testimony. And he adds the testimony of Matthew Ford, one of his favorite media proxies, who specifically names Glenn Gaffney and attributes him to all this stuff that I've said, being part of the UFO crash retrieval program, being a secret advisor to AARO. Now, this guy, Glenn Gaffney on the right, he was part of the CIA for like 20 plus years. And then he worked with In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's private investment firm, which they like dance around it being that, but that's basically what it is. And we're going to cover some of that stuff too. But this is a pretty big accusation. Like I said, Lue did it in the most way he could do it without actually doing it himself, which I think also says something. But what do you think, Tim? Pretty interesting that he would submit Matt Ford's statement to his official congressional record, naming this guy, right? Isn't that like a pretty big accusation?
It's a huge accusation, and I think, as you're pointing out, it's under the radar. So all of those little things that aren't made public, because most people just won't be able to see it, but it still gets submitted into the congressional record. I was curious what information would be submitted at a later date, because we also heard Mace sort of mention that later, is that they had, I think it's like 11 days after that initial hearing for them to be able to submit those things. So it is big that, he's vicariously using someone else to put this admission in.
Yeah, and it speaks to the whole kind of and it's funny too, because even in Matt Ford's thing that he submits, Matt Ford references the Liberation Times. So it's like, it's pretty interesting, I think, the dynamic, and it isn't always necessarily nefarious, but I think people should be aware of it. The way this information is laundered, where it seems like you're getting information from the Liberation Times, from Matt Ford, the Good Trouble Show, from Lue Elizondo, when in reality, it's all just information from Lue Elizondo, right? Like bleeding out through these other people, which again isn't necessarily good or bad. Yeah.
But it leaves it up to mystery about who is it that's really spreading this information, and it's like a confirmation bias about who's spreading what.
And people will know the beats I love to cover. This beat that we're about to cover directly ties into the harassment beat too. So we'll kind of get into that, but because a lot of accusations made against this man, and I have my feelings about Lue, but if this is accurate, this is a huge development. People are like, oh, they're never naming names, they're never pointing. They've named a name, dude. They've named this guy, Glenn Gaffney. The CIA's Science and Technology Department is part of the UFO crash retrieval program and a secret advisor to AARO. So not only is he naming somebody who is part of the program, right? Somebody who was involved during the OSAP days, he's also naming somebody who is, in the Lue camp view, is part of the whole AARO disinformation campaign. And I've even seen some of Lue's little fans and followers attribute this guy, Glenn Gaffney, to being behind some of the reprisals that AARO whistleblowers face And one of the reasons why. So, and it's just kind of funny. Like, I feel for this guy. He is a public figure. I was kind of like, do you even want to do this? Because it's doxing, but he's a public figure. Lue named him in the congressional testimony, but it is funny that like he doesn't look like a big evil dude, right? Like how he's pictured out to be. Any other thoughts before we kind of get into this timeline of events with Glenn Gaffney?
It's definitely an interesting topic because the one thing with Glenn Gaffney is obviously, we'll talk about him moving into that private sector, but there is something that is part of that narrative about the control of, this technology or whatever it is with the UFO technology, whether or not it's, free energy or whatever is going to be able to come with it, is that there are people that are wanting to keep that secret in a sense of, almost capitalistic or corporatist aspects of wanting to harness and keep that under wraps for own business purposes or business ventures, I think, too. So I don't know if you'll have clips too, again, Gaffney kind of talking specifically about the future of, energy and technology for the United States. So sometimes I feel like people can kind of allude, maybe that's why he'd be considered a gatekeeper as well.
Oh, you know what? There was this one AI one that maybe I think that's what you're talking about that we could always cut to on YouTube because somebody already clipped it shortly. But I do have some of his other stuff of him just talking about his career and whatnot. Some recent interviews he did. He's done interviews. Hopefully he gets into the UFO circus because I mean he's kind of been forced into it. I'd love to hear his reaction. I looked hard for one, but I haven't seen anything from him yet. So this is still a developing story. But let's continue. So only 14 slides. These are really small on my main backup channel. But so when did this all first start popping up in my zeitgeist, as far as I was aware of it? The first time I remember anything like this tying back to Glenn, which we would later learn would tie back to Glenn, was October 2023. So about a year ago. And again, this is Matt Ford. He does the Good Trouble show. He does do some good stuff. I like that, but I totally think he's currently being used as a intelligence media asset, for better or worse. There's this pattern of Lue Elizondo finding fresh people new to the topic, 1-2 years max, and then just kind of like elevating them, which kind of gives this sense of what's the word? Like you owe them, right? Like your success is kind of like, you know what I mean? And it makes sense. Like, why would you, if you think it's just a normal relationship, fine. But yeah, so Matt Ford is the current kind of iteration of Lue's mouthpiece. Good for him. Luis Jimenez was previously one of these people. Stephen Greenstreet was the one before that. And there's this weird pattern of them kind of flipping and feeling that they got psyoped. But anyways, last October, Matt Ford says this. And the reason I'm kind of highlighting this relationship is because Matt Ford is new to this. He's a political player. I think he's maybe coming up on his 2 years in the subject in the field. And I would surmise that about 90% of what he says, that's kind of in the weeds. This like, why is Matt Ford naming Glenn Gaffney? Why would he know that? It's safe to assume it's coming from Lue Elizondo, and it's been double confirmed by Lue Elizondo adding Matt Ford's testimony too.
And he's also part of the UAP Disclosure Fund.
Correct. He's also part of the UAP Disclosure Fund. So yeah, so this, he's not going to name Glenn Gaffney here, but this is when we first start hearing about this secret AARO advisory panel. And again, AARO is the All-Domain Anomalies Resolution Office created by Congress, largely in part because of the big phone home, I believe. And we'll just listen. This is what he said about AARO. And this is the first, looking back on it, we can see them kind of pointing at Glenn Gaffney as a person to be paying attention to.
Question. Has anyone from AARO reached out to whistleblower David Grush? The answer is no. No one from AARO, including its leader, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, has reached out to David Grush or his attorney via any form of official communication. None. Zilch. Not an email, not a phone call, or even a message from a carrier pigeon. Absolutely nothing. It's crazy. Instead, Kirkpatrick is going around Washington, D.C., or having his underlings do it, whispering that Grush should visit him in a way that's kind of reminiscent of that, frankly, kind of shitty passive-aggressive post on LinkedIn. So think about it. One of the highest ranking former intelligence officials goes on national TV and testifies under oath to Congress about secret Pentagon UAP back engineering programs, files whistleblower complaints, followed by dozens of other whistleblowers claiming the same thing. You have a former Pentagon program director on the record about super secret legacy UAP programs. And Dr. Kirkpatrick doesn't bother to reach out to David Grush officially? I mean, you can't make this stuff.
I'm just going to pause it here too, because he's going to get into the AARO advisory panel. But it's interesting, this first point he's talking about, we kind of learned after the fact via FOIA documents from John Greenwald that like Grush was kind of talking to them, and there was even a point where Grush stood up the AARO people. Do you remember that, Tim? Where like the AARO people were like, "Hey, we're here at the building," and Grush, the emails are FOIA'd, and he says like, "Hey, sorry, I backed out." You know what I mean? So it's kind of this weird flip narrative, right off the bat.
Yeah, saying that they're not reaching out to him, but which is not necessarily the structure of AARO anyway.
Well, also we've heard nonstop from them that like don't go to AARO, right? Like AARO's evil. Like I'm not, like it's like almost like a statement of pride for people to be like, I didn't go talk to AARO. It's a weird flip of the narrative that I think people are forgetting, that for a while the narrative was like, why isn't AARO reaching out to Grush, right? When today I think it's very clearly like whistleblowers don't go talk to AARO. You know what I mean?
Well, that narrative continues even on to this recent hearing as well, as where Gillibrand had actually brought it up as whether or not are they a safe organization for whistleblowers to go to.
I'm gonna go ahead and continue here.
It is pure incompetence, or is it something else? Is AARO, under Sean Kirkpatrick's leadership, intent on getting to the truth for both Congress and the American people? Can whistleblowers, Congress, and Americans trust AARO and its leadership? Now, what I'm about to tell you is from a very high-ranking source, very high-ranking, that has given us information that is always panned out. This information is significant, and in my opinion, it demands a congressional investigation into AARO. So, everyone pay attention. When AARO was established, Ronald Moultrie also established an advisory council called AARO Exec, or AARO Executive Council, whose purpose was to provide oversight and guidance to AARO, and was headed by Ronald Moultrie himself. The existence of this advisory board was nothing secret. Everybody knew about it on the Hill. Moultrie actually announced it in an official Pentagon memo that you can find on the internet. So Congress knew of its existence and who sat on the council. There was nothing to hide, but there has been something hidden from Congress, and here it is. When AARO was formed by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, he assembled a separate secret council of advisors. A few people on Capitol Hill recently got wind of this and asked Kirkpatrick for the names of who was sitting on this secret council. Kirkpatrick refused to tell them. Why? I'll tell you why. Because some of these unelected officials who sit on this super secret advisory council are the actual gatekeepers of the legacy UAP crash recovery and back engineering program. I mean, seriously, talk about the fox guarding the hen house. You cannot make this shit up. And Dr. Kirkpatrick, sorry to break it to you, but these officials on Capitol Hill now have the list of names that are sitting on your little secret council. Congress and congressional staffers, this is really huge. It calls into question, what is going on at AARO? Who is guiding it? And if you have one front-facing board that everyone knows about, but then you have something that's hidden from you and kept under wraps, and then you have at least...
All right, we could stop there. I don't think Matt would copyright strike. We're doing constructive criticism, but do you remember this, Tim? This first accusations that Sean Kirkpatrick has a secret advisory board that are part of the gatekeepers, right? So looking back now, we know that they're referencing Glenn Gaffney here with the context we've gotten recently. But I remember when this first happened. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and actually just going back over this again, it's interesting. He's saying that Congress is already well aware of this, that they have the names of these people too. So it makes it interesting why he decides to name them specifically in that letter.
Yeah, and another thing I want to just emphasize with people, and I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, although I have my own opinions of it. When Matt Ford did this, he's like month 5, I think, into ufology, right? And there's just this pattern of Lue finding these people who are fresh-faced to the subject and then pumping them with this info. It's like there's no way a guy 5 months on the field can get that in depth without
who's telling them this,
right?
too? You know, I'm curious, really, in the end, it begs the question, as it has been for Schellenberger and all of these other people, is where is he getting that information from? And when you realize the close group of people he's with, it makes you think it might start with the name Lue, right?
I suspect he's getting from Lue, but then I'm curious too. And again, I don't want to knock everything. Lue's done great things. He helped get UAPTF and all that. So if this is all true, it should be noted and reported. And honestly, commending Matt Ford and Lue for getting it out there. But I just can't separate Lue and the shadiness he's done from this info. You know what I mean? I'm gonna question it. I'm not just gonna get angry at some boomer with glasses because Matt Ford and Lue tell me to. But we are gonna analyze everything they said. So I guess yeah, this is the first. Again, this is October 2023, and now here's where it gets into the beat I like to cover, the harassment beat.
Special.
Oh, wait, actually, wait, real quick. Here's Ross Coulthart also speaking about this AARO Secret Advisor panel. Let's just watch this.
Respondent, Ross Coulthart. All right, Ross, I'm just going to give you the floor on this because you know far more about this than, well, certainly than me, but anybody else. This report, the headline, as Joe says, basically no evidence of aliens or any kind of cover-up of aliens. You say what?
Good evening, Connell. Well, firstly, I don't think anybody's surprised that the Pentagon is making a pronouncement like this. I'm talking to multiple people tonight, people inside the legacy retrieval program, reverse engineering program that is being secretly operated by people within the US government and private aerospace who hoot with laughter at this feeble attempt by the Pentagon to try and stop the issue being discussed any further. We know for a fact that the Inspector General of the intelligence community, that is the oversight body for the intelligence community, separately from the Pentagon, has made a determination that David Grush's complaints are credible and urgent. And that's why they were referred to the Congress for investigation. Right. And I was only just recently in Washington talking to senior staffers, senior congressional representatives, and senior senators. And by golly, they are not letting go of this just because the Pentagon makes a pronouncement that it's not true. They know it's true. They have first-hand witnesses who've testified about it, who didn't go to AARO, to the Defense Department, because frankly, Connell, they didn't trust them. And that's the problem. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the person who created this report, it's alleged by the people I've been talking to that he set out with a preconceived agenda. And I can reveal here tonight that I've found out some of the members of a special secret advisory committee that Dr. Kirkpatrick used to advise him in the preparation of that report. I have their names, I have their roles, I know who they are. They are the gatekeepers, believe it or not, to this legacy program. Mm-hmm. They were quite literally pulling the strings on this AARO report. And people are so angry, so bitterly angry with this feeble attempt at a cover-up that they are now leaking more assiduously to people like me.
You can stop it there, but again, and I like Ross personally too, but I think he's another example of, like, we're hearing it from Ross, we're hearing it from Matt Ford, we're hearing it from Liberation Times, but in reality, we're all just really hearing it from Lue Elizondo and from 3 different places, right? Like, even the messaging is kind of like beat for beat the same thing Matt Ford was saying, which makes sense if they're all kind of behind the scenes talking with each other, collaborating. But yeah, I just think that's something to be aware of. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, it's just that they're making an error of it sounds like multiple people. I mean, Ross makes it sound like it's not just one person, but it's multiple people that are telling him that, which, you know, I have my own doubts with Ross and his vetting of things a lot of times, but it's interesting how they start to kind of conflate this narrative now that they're constantly saying it's over 40 whistleblowers, and then, you know, he's saying that it's multiple people that are telling him that there's these gatekeepers for AARO. So I don't, you know, it's sometimes hard for me to parse what's going on with that.
Yeah, and Eric has a great comment here in the live chat. If he has that info, then Ross is worse than the gatekeepers he is so against. There is this weird element in this whole field of, like, people being like anti-gatekeeper, but gatekeeping some pretty significant information that could help push things forward, right?
Ross claims he's got all of this information all the time, but he doesn't report on it. I mean, his job as a reporter, I think, would be to reveal that himself. But it does sound like with this too, he's riding the coattails.
My take on it is he's also being led on, right? Like everyone thinks they're all in the know, but I think everyone's just kind of being manipulated to a degree, and he's being probably led on and like blue-balled and shit all the time by Lue, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, is Lue the one that told him that there's a building somewhere in the world that is built over a UFO so large because they can't move it? Like, I'm curious where he gets that from too.
Yeah. All right. So now continuing along. So this is like about well, this is a little bit later, but October of 2023 is when you first start hearing about this secret advisory panel, as Matt Ford said, as Ross said, that are part of the gatekeepers, right? They were part of the crash retrieval program, and they are now advising Sean Kirkpatrick secretly outside of congressional oversight. This is what Sean Kirkpatrick had to say when he was asked about it. And
persistent question.
I'm just going to remind you guys that these theories were first raised by Matt Ford on the Good Trouble Show through Lue Elizondo, right? And listen to what Sean Kirkpatrick's response is to when he's asked about this advisory panel.
Has to do with a senior technical advisory group that you must have stood up, that is helping advise the work you do. So they're just questions about that group. What is it made up of? Are these people from outside government? Is this that academic and scientific community you just referenced?
So it's a strategic technical advisory group. They don't like to be called senior. And they actually do work. They're the review board for, the analytic framework consists of multiple layers of review, and they're one of the layers of review. We don't give out names and identities of anybody associated with this office other than me and a handful of very specific people, because of the fact that the harassment and the threats that are attendant to our ability to do this job. And I know we had the same problem with the NASA panel. I'm not going to subject my team to that. I have some of the best professionals on the face of the planet working some of this. But I'm not going to subject them or their families to that kind of harassment that is making our job a lot harder. I've had people try to dig up information on my wife, my child, where I live, make threats, send harassments. That's not called for.
And what is the claim? Is the claim that you're evil because you haven't said what they want you to say about the sources of these anomalous sightings?
That's a great way of saying it, but I would put it a different way, right? I told everybody when we stood up, I would follow the data wherever it led. Mm-hmm. That means you have to follow the data and the evidence where it leads. If you don't like where it leads, don't call me a liar and then come after me.
Okay, so do you remember this, right? And now with everything, right, with this new context, isn't it kind of interesting? Because obviously I've been on the harassment beat for a while, and I totally picked up on this. And Moran Lerner, the King Milk for Harassment Archive, posted this immediately when it happened. He gave this speech at the Hayden Center, which is a think tank for Michael Hayden, former CIA director. And the Hayden Center official Twitter account liked this tweet. Very, very interesting with this clip. Now, what's interesting about it is, again, the person asked him simply, and again, I don't blame the person, right? The person asked him simply about something he heard on Matt Ford's show about this secret advisory panel, right? And Kirkpatrick...
Do you know who it is that asked that question? Did they ever say their name? Okay.
I could maybe go back and try and find it. But what's interesting, right, is he asked him about a theory first raised on the Good Trouble Show, and Kirkpatrick immediately goes into this like 2-minute monologue about harassment, right, and why these names aren't public. And this is why I say it's important too to discuss this, because one, harassment is bad and crazy and makes our whole movement look bad, but it is also a perfect tool that could be used to cover or shield maybe some actual things like this. Let's just go full Lue crew narrative with this, right? Like Kirkpatrick's using the harassment beat to shield the secret advisory board. You see what I mean? Although I tend to lean on it's actually just harassment, and that's why they didn't want to put these names out, which I totally understand. These people have all been demonized, but like the top tiers of this disclosure movement. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think how much of it is manufactured is to create a section of people online to encourage them to be harassers in some regard that gives them almost a justification as well to become more secretive within it. And especially if you can, inflate them so much that they become malicious and finding people's home addresses and family and backstories and stuff like that too. I don't know. It begs more questions to me, is like how much of that is also being encouraged by someone else to do.
Right, because again, like I said, and I'm willing to look at it both sides of this. Like the harassment's bad, but also it could be used totally as a tool to cover up some malicious things that I just find it personally interesting that his mind, Sean Kirkpatrick's mind, when asked about that, immediately goes there. I just think it's worth noting. It could have been a million places, but again, the guy who asked the question and say, "Hey, are you being harassed?" or "What's up with this?" He just said, "There's this theory I heard on Matt Ford's show a week ago. What's your take on it?" And he almost gives this like 30,000-yard stare answer about like harassment. Kind of interesting, especially again with the new context of Lue Elizondo naming the person that they're talking about now in his congressional testimony. Right? Doesn't that just change the whole thing when you realize that's the question being asked? Like, are you working for Glenn Gaffney? Is what was really asked here.
Yeah, and I do think it is something to be addressed. Is why is there a secret? Do they report to Gillibrand or to any of the senators at all as well? Like maybe behind a closed door session? Are we even aware that is a possibility? I would like to have more transparency when it comes to that.
Right, agreed, and that's what I kind of it's frustrating, because the Lue crew isn't always wrong. If that's actually happening, we should get to it, but when they're also tied to all this other craziness, it's hard to like be championing for that. But I agree, like we should know. And if that is the case, and even senators and congressmen don't know who these advisors are, that is kind of fishy and room for some total manipulation by the legacy gatekeepers, I would say. Any other thoughts before we continue along here?
No, that's it.
A fun trip down memory lane, huh? All these different moments kind of being reviewed in this new light.
Hindsight is 2020, and I mean this is almost to the date a year ago, which is crazy.
Yeah, very, very interesting. All right, next. So the next big development on this whole kind of saga of Glenn Gaffney comes this year, November 2024, right before the hearing. Christopher Sharp of the Liberation Times, who I personally like, by the way. I know a lot of my debunker friends kind of view him as just a total Lue shill, which he kind of is in some ways, kind of got to own it. Lue has definitely created like a network of like straight up CIA intelligence media outlets, which I just find hilarious because like I've studied this. They've done this all over the world. Like in India, they created the National Enquirer of India and a bunch of other countries like in the 60s and 70s. So it's just kind of interesting to see the modern iteration of like an intelligence officer kind of building up all these different channels, the Good Trouble Show, Liberation Times. What's another one? The Debrief, I think would kind of count as that. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's worth to just note that like these are connections, and 9 times out of 10, when Liberation Times is posting something from a secret source, it's probably Lue.
It's creating their mouthpiece for them too. And what's the other one? Daily Wire, not Daily Wire, but like a Daily
Mail, yeah. Who
Daily
remember
Mail.
as we covered? I think you were there.
Yeah.
Right? With that,
Yeah,
they recently just did their first flip on him, but the Daily Mail was writing or dying with him too, doing hit pieces on Lue's old boss for him. I think they're wising up. But November 2024, Liberation Times names Glenn Gaffney, and I guess I'll just kind of read this. This is from 2 different articles in November that Chris Sharp writes. He says, as previously reported, according to sources, former CIA Director in Science and Technology Glenn Gaffney allegedly blocked an attempt to transfer alleged non-UFO human materials from Lockheed Martin. The alleged materials are believed to have been recovered since the 1950s. Liberation Times understands that due to recruitment challenges in engineering, James Ryder, vice president of Lockheed Martin Space Systems at the time, proposed transferring these materials to an external organization to drive new breakthroughs. Liberation Times also understands from sources that one of Gaffney's successors within the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology rebuffed engagement efforts from the now disbanded UAP task force. So these are some pretty big accusations, which again will only become more solidified once Lue adds this to his congressional testimony. If Lue doesn't add that to the congressional testimony, these are all just kind of like another story out there. But Lue adding these to his congressional testimony is like really solidifying this. Something else kind of interesting before we continue. That have been recovered since the 1950s. Interesting that he doesn't say the 1940s. And I saw some discussion online that maybe they were thinking this is part of the whole Kingman thing. And maybe that's why Chris Mellon released that Kingman UFO tweet, the crash that happened in the 1950s, right? I would just, if it would have said the 40s, I would have thought Roswell, but the fact that it's not saying the 40s, I'm kind of like, What are your thoughts on this first kind of part, Tim? These claims that Glenn Gaffney was behind this blocking of material. A lot happening here. One, we're saying Lockheed Martin has UFO materials. Two, Glenn Gaffney, or two, this guy James Ryder was looking for external help from these crash parts recovered in the 50s. So that's a year we could look at, a year range. He was looking to get it out. We're going to hear later that it was to OSAP, but that this Glenn Gaffney guy blocked it. This is kind of a lot of information, right?
Yes, and this has been part of the narrative for some time now, and I think specifically George Knapp had talked about it as well, right? That there was this divestment that had been wanting to happen, and it seems like this one brings a lot more clarity about specifically what that was or what that was entailing. And Grush was even asked about something like this, right? Or there was something, I can't remember specifically, but it seems like now they're trying to provide a little bit more clarity specifically about what that transaction was going to be.
Yeah, and if this is all accurate, commendable. And you know what? I always give Chris Sharp credit. He was the first American journalist, or not American, journalist in the world to report on the congressional hearings. The first ones with like AIMSOG, with Ronald Moultrie. Do you remember that one? It was before the Grush one. It was like the real first one. He was the first one to report on that in the world, and no one could ever take that from him. I'm a big fan of Chris. He's been a fan of mine since before he started Liberation Times. He kind of helped me with that one Chinese story I did back in like 2018. I think he's a great guy, great dad.
That's super cool.
Yeah, no, he's cool. I like him. But he definitely is also like a Lue mouthpiece. So just, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah. All right, so continuing along, now they start talking about Michael Gold. And if you remember, he was the other guy who testified at this past hearing. And a lot of people were speculating that he was going to actually be the one who brings up all this stuff, which he didn't. But he was Bigelow's lawyer during the time that this alleged UFO crash retrieval transfer prevention thing happened. So let's just kind of read this. Gold's former boss, Robert Bigelow, played a key role in efforts to transfer materials of advanced non-human origin from Lockheed Martin to a program within the Defense Intelligence Agency, known as the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, AARO. When efforts failed, those involved in AARO helped establish a prospective special access program within the Department of Homeland Security as an alternate means to accomplish the transfer. That effort also failed. I believe that's a reference to Kona Blue. I'm not sure. Speaking to Liberation Times, multiple sources claim that these material transfer efforts were blocked by former CIA Director of Science and Technology, Glenn Gaffney, when he held the position. So that's interesting. Here he says multiple sources, right? So, I'm going to give Chris the benefit of the doubt that he's getting it from more than just Lue. But watch it be like Lue, Matt Ford, and Ross Coulthart told me that'd be funny. Gaffney's alleged interference in the material transfer left those involved, including the now deceased James Ryder, former vice president of Lockheed Martin Space Systems, who is said to have led efforts within Lockheed Martin, feeling threatened due to the harshness of exchanges with CIA officials. Now that is unfortunate, and I think somebody in our chat might have said something like that. But this James Ryder guy, it's unfortunate that these people who could probably illuminate some stuff are dead, right? That's a bummer. Maybe someone in his family he told something to. But again, these are some pretty interesting names being dropped, some pretty interesting details being dropped that will only become more interesting because Lue's going to kind of add this whole hoopla to his congressional testimony. The last little part here says, ultimately, Liberation Times understands that the transfer was blocked by Gaffney, as the CIA's Director of Technology remains the original custodian of the alleged non-human materials, which Lockheed Martin may still possess today. So, I don't know. Any thoughts on that? I think a lot of interesting stuff being said here that obviously we would love to be able to verify. Definitely some good leads. I'd love to know who the other sources were. I wish James Ryder was still alive because he's even speaking here, feeling threatened due to the harshness of the exchange. Very, very interesting. Any thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, I think there's nothing I think about it that is out of the realm here. And part of me wonders too if maybe Grush could even be someone who's reporting that as well. I mean, something maybe he had found specifically during his investigations for all of that. But it's these are stories that have been around in the zeitgeist of ufology for a long time, but this one is like specifically saying names and dates and who and what and government agencies that are part of it too. So, and at the end there, what they're saying as well is allegedly. So they're making sure that they're adding that in there as well. So I think it's fascinating overall.
Yeah, and people want to knock on people for not naming names. They name names here. It sucks that there's this weird kind of harassment beat to it. But if this guy is doing this stuff, like the people deserve to know he is a public servant, just like Lue is, right? I feel like we could give
Absolutely.
Glenn Gaffney the same scrutiny. I don't want to fall into the trap of just forgiving anything Lue, anybody, But yeah.
But that's part of the reprisals too that we're that they're talking about is the threatening with it. But these if someone is legitimately talking about the harshness, and exchanges and, any sort of retribution that they're getting from it, I'm almost tending to believe that there's more validity to this story with it specifically.
Yeah, and again, this. Well, I think this is the first time they really named him. Although, as we said in October of 2023, Matt Ford said they named him to Congress, basically. So I'm curious to know, what do you do if you're Glenn Gaffney and you're just being accused of all this stuff?
You don't say anything. I guarantee they will just, it's not even acknowledging it. That's what I think it would come down to.
Yeah, and that could tell you something too. It's crazy. All right, let's continue along. What do we got next? Okay, so the next little saga thing in this saga is right before the hearing. I think this was like the day before the hearing. Matt Ford is hanging out with Lue, and then he tweets these things out like literally while he's hanging out with Lue. Because what had happened was before the hearing, Tim Gallaudet, Mike Gold, Lue Elizondo, their testimonies were posted to the Congressional website. And Sean Kirkpatrick responded to Tim Gallaudet's statement saying that because Tim Gallaudet accuses AARO of running like a disinfo campaign against him or something like that. And then Kirkpatrick claps back and is like, no, and he was just looking for a job or something. So,
well, he calls him out and says that he's also essentially a nut job. He calls him like a conspiracy minded person that is biased about how he's going to come to a determination with things.
Yeah. So in the midst of all that, right before the hearing, Matt Ford's hanging out with Lue, and then he tweets these out. I'm pretty sure like while they're hanging out. He says, "Hey, UFO Twitter, who thinks we should release the names of the people on Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick's secret advisory board for the DoD AARO right before the UAP hearing? The board, Sean, and the Department of Defense refused to tell Congress about ? 100% vote yes." And he says, "Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick of AARO fucked with the wrong people, and tomorrow he is going to find out, as we are exposing damning information that every member of Congress will want to hear at the UAP hearing. You're welcome, Sean. Much love from the Good Trouble Show." Kissy emoji.
Yeah, so that's vindictive right there. I totally understand the point that he's trying to get at it as well, because we want transparency. I think you and I both agree with that, right?
100%. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I mean, so I think it is telling there too is that, the board, they refuse to tell Congress about it is, so they're keeping even secret from Congress there. But then to make it almost like vindictive and then the kissy emoji, that makes it
cringe,
even
right? And
yeah.
Like,
and it's a weird sort of power move. And it's almost, you're not being any better than the people that you're saying are causing reprisals against other people,
Yeah. All right. So next kind of thing in this little timeline, and again, this is not by any means a complete story yet. We're just kind of getting all the little data points we have now. This is probably going to continue to be a developing story. But you just kind of want to get the temperature check so far. So at the hearing,
Mr. Elizondo,
Lue kind of mentions this Lockheed transfer thing that the Liberation Times had written about a few weeks before the hearing, right? And it almost seems like Burleson was kind of read in on it too. It's almost kind of seems scripted, not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. I'd imagine the senators or the Congress people on their staffs would want to like have an idea of what's going on, what they're asking about, so they just don't look dumb. But it's interesting that this gets mentioned at the official stage, and you might have forgot about this, Tim, because there's so much that happened. But let's just listen to this clip.
Does any branch of the United States government or defense contractors possess technology So there's documentation that I believe was submitted for the record that was released, was approved for release by the U.S. Pentagon, by the Department of Defense Office of Pre-Publication Security Review, and it states one of the reasons why my predecessor program, OSAP, was trying to collect material of unknown origin.
Was it successfully collected?
It was not. What happened is that there was an aerospace contract company that requested to divest itself of the material that was collected in the 1950s. Unfortunately, that didn't actually occur.
So let's dive into that. That's the Bigelow Aerospace, correct? So
Yes, sir.
There was a journalist, Christopher Sharp, who said that there was a transfer between Lockheed Martin, Bigelow Aerospace, and the CIA.
See the plug, right? The plug game is there, dude. The plug game is out the congressional hearing. Shouts out Chris Sharp. You're doing what you got to do. You're getting plugged in Congress. That's pretty cool.
Congressional record.
Yeah.
I allegedly blocked this. Can you describe that?
What I can say is that it was blocked. Why it was blocked, I can only surmise. I was part of some conversations later on with some of those contract personnel where they had told all of us that is accurate. What we required was a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force in order to make that complete, and that never occurred. And so when Secretary Mattis became Secretary of Defense, I decided it would be appropriate for me to try to receive a memo from him as SecDef, as Secretary of Defense, if we could not get a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force to transfer that material.
So if that material exists today, who's in possession?
So I wouldn't be able to have that conversation in an open hearing. We'd probably have to have that.
Okay,
All right. So any thoughts on that? And again, right, like the context of this, right? I feel like because we were watching together, there was just so much happening. I didn't really pick up on this. I think I picked up on Liberation Times being shouted out, but especially now with the context of like them all naming Glenn Gaffney and whatnot, kind of interesting display here, right? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and honestly, this rings true to me. That whole delivery didn't seem I don't know what it seems like, but to me that seems like a true happening that he's stating, that was really an event that had happened. I'm curious why he doesn't reference like Lakatsky or that they were talking about how they had breached this material or something like that. So I think, I don't know, I find it interesting. It rings true to me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, and again, like Lue definitely has his issues, but he's kind of putting it as much out there as he can here in front of some pretty important people, where I'm kind of convinced something here happened. I'd love to hear Glenn Gaffney's response. I'd love to hear more about this. I think we're going to, because he's putting it out there.
Well, I think that all of those people from OSAP should be talking about this as well. I wish, Eric Davis and Lakatsky would be willing to testify and answer these questions as well, because it seems like, as we know, they were really the people behind this program. Lue was not a director. He was not part of that, even though he's masqueraded as that. But they're the ones that seem like they have the butt of the stick there to
even here, right? He says my predecessor program, like he's kind of distancing himself from the whole thing.
Yes, yeah, which I think another strategic way that he's saying it as well, and dodging around the fact that he was not a director of ATIP or OSAP or anything, and having to bring that in. So it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. All right, there's a few more slides here because, like I said, this is all kind of still developing and still kind of new, very fresh, I'd say, very fresh happening in the UFO world. Let's see. So then after the hearing, like right after, I think maybe the same day or day after, Matt Ford releases this statement, and this is before Lue Elizondo adds the letter that Matt Ford writes to his congressional testimony. So we'll just listen to this. He posts this on Twitter. He says, recorded statement of Matthew Ford regarding damning evidence regarding AARO Director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and former head of CIA Directorate of Science and Technology Glenn Gaffney. For the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, subcommittees on cybersecurity, information technology, and government innovation and national security, the border, and foreign affairs. Unidentified anomalous phenomena exposing the truth, which was the name of the hearing. And then he tags all the usual suspects. Let's see what he says.
Chairwoman Mace, Chairman Grothman, ranking members Connolly and Garcia, and members of the committee. My name is Matthew Ford, an American journalist and host of the Good Trouble Show podcast. Today, I'm introducing damning information regarding the former director of the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I am a patriot who cares deeply about our nation's security, but above all, I care about the truth. In November of last year, journalists Christopher Sharp, Josh Boswell, and I published a story in the Daily Mail exposing for the first time the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology's Office of Global Access and its classified UAP crash recovery program. Last weekend, Christopher Sharp published a follow-up article in the Liberation Times, providing further detail on how the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology operates its UAP crash recovery and reverse engineering programs through the Office of Global Access and the CIA's Counter-Proliferation Mission Center, or WCPMC. The head of the Directorate of Science and Technology serves as the primary gatekeeper of the entire UAP Deep Legacy program, overseeing operations such as the detection of UAPs through classified platforms, recovery operations, disbursement of recovered craft to government agencies and private defense contractors, and protection of derived off-world technologies. Glenn Gaffney, the former head of the Directorate of Science and Technology, is one of those gatekeepers. Last year, I revealed that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of AARO, had assembled a secret technical advisory group to counsel AARO. Following my story, Dr. Kirkpatrick confirmed the existence of this committee to members of Congress, but refused to disclose the members' identities. As of 2 weeks ago, this classified advisory board continues to advise AARO. Multiple sources have confirmed that Glenn Gaffney, the former head of the Directorate of Science and Technology and gatekeeper of the UAP Deep Legacy program, was handpicked by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick to be on this advisory board. I must emphasize this. The most consequential person involved with the cover-up of non-human technology is advising the office which Congress has given a mandate to find these technologies. This is an abomination. This is unconstitutional. This is criminal. Also concerning is the fact that Glenn Gaffney is not the only AARO advisory board member who is involved with the Legacy Crash Retrieval and Reverse Engineering program. There are others whose names have not yet been divulged to me. These revelations are significant.
Look at Matt Ford being carrot and stick there.
Because one of AARO's primary missions is to provide a means for government whistleblowers to make protected disclosures on classified UAP special access programs, or SAPs, and controlled access programs, or CAPs, to AARO and its staff. The fact that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick chose as one of his primary advisors the very gatekeeper overseeing CIA-controlled UAP access programs raises serious questions about Dr. Kirkpatrick's true motives as the director of AARO. This reporting indicates that AARO may function as a fly-paper operation, intercepting whistleblowers' testimonies and feeding their identities back to the CIA. You have heard that there are whistleblowers who don't trust AARO. My sources have informed me that this is one of the reasons why. If the CIA intercepts their testimony before it reaches Congress, whistleblowers are in grave danger. Therefore, I employ you to wield your subpoena powers against hostile witnesses, such as Glenn Gaffney, former PDD&I Stephanie O'Sullivan, and the former head of the CIA's Office of Global Access, Douglas Wolf. Dozens of whistleblowers are depending on you. I also encourage this committee to subpoena emails between former Senior Intelligence Officer David Grush and Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. These emails contain written evidence that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is not being truthful with Congress regarding his knowledge of classified UAP controlled access programs. Thank you for your leadership and for your attention to this urgent matter.
So yeah, a lot of interesting things there, naming Glenn Gaffney a bunch of times. Also, like I said, attributing one that he's part of the gatekeeping program, that he's advising AARO, but that he's also part of like some kind of weird like physical criminal reprisals against these whistleblowers. Are you picking up on that at all, Tim, as well?
Yeah, and this is something when Kirkpatrick was leaving AARO and kind of making his departure and giving his interviews to Green Street and stuff. There was aspects about how he was talking about it that it seemed like AARO was almost this catch and release program where they were being used. I mean, I got the vibe from a couple of statements where it seemed like they were there to catch a whistleblower, giving this information that feeds it off to someone else who in the end comes and tells them that's not what you saw, that's not what it is, and maybe you should rethink that. I mean, that was when I had heard that, it seemed somewhat like maybe that's what AARO was. And it almost seems like that's what he's saying AARO is, especially with this advisory board, which Kirkpatrick admitted that there was this secret board there. He's saying it's for harassment, and I totally understand that, and that's probably a valid reason as well. But what are they advising him about? And why? And are they coming to congressional members? Are they speaking to senators that oversee AARO and even telling them as well? I do think that there is a lack of transparency that's happening there. I don't like that Matt Ford is necessarily like taunting them in those tweets and stuff. But I think there's a lot of information that's coming out from this. So I think that's interesting to me.
Yeah, and I got a question for you too. Actually, when we go back and we think about that Kirkpatrick clip I played, do you feel that he was kind of being honest, like that way you felt with Lue, like he's telling at least some kind of real story? Like I kind of felt that emotion from him.
I do, but and part of me is almost like, how much is it that he's also just being kept in blinded by that? He's a science guy, so obviously he's just going to be very matter of fact when it comes to things. But also, how easy is it to sort of guide his perspective on things if you just give it to him in a manner of fact method? And my guess is he says it specifically. He didn't want to do this, and I'd be interested. Who is it specifically that selected him to be head of AARO originally?
Yeah, he seemed pissed about it. Like he.
Oh my God! It sounded like they dragged him and like they like almost like forced him into it. So part of me's kind of always wondered, who is it that really put him into that position? And then I think,
but also on the flip side, because he did that Oumuamua paper with Avi Loeb, and he was at that Skinwalker Ranch meeting too, right? There's all this weird gray area around Kirkpatrick, which I'll admit, there is some weirdness around him. But also, again, on the other side too, we heard Matt at the beginning say like, why isn't AARO reaching out to Grush? When today the narrative on that is so flipped 100%. Oh, like the whistleblowers don't want to. But just a year ago, Matt was out here being like, you know what I mean? Like they're ghosting the whistleblowers, right? Like, so there's confusion on both sides of this discussion. That's annoying in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's hard in this method as well because there's no sense of the programs that really came before. I mean, how often do you hear them even talking about Project Blue Book or even like mentioning any of those things, or like Hynek and those regards? So I think they definitely want to keep this narrative within this like 21st century playbook without ever kind of referencing things that even came before that. And it almost seems like they've learned things from how Blue Book was run, and that they can kind of control AARO in a different manner as well, by trying to make it more public facing, or at least more transparent, when we're finding out that there is a secret advisory board that we don't necessarily know what they're advising about, or who they are. So I think it's interesting that it just becomes sticky and it starts to muddy everything. It's hard.
Yeah, it really is. All right, so we got a few more left. What do we got here? So here's what Lue actually added a few days after the fact to his testimony. So if you go on the, what is it? Congress.gov thing for this, and I wasn't going to pull that website just to kind of show you guys, but it's kind of hard to find because all the links I saved are like of the individual PDFs. But if you go to the official Congress.gov website for this hearing, Matt Ford's testimony was added 11/20, so about a week after, like the last day, I think, actually, you could do it. I think you have a week from the hearing, which is the 13th. So that's 7 days, right? So for whatever reason, kind of weird that Lue did it at that minute. Here's Lue and Matt in DC. I guess I'll just kind of read what Lue Elizondo submitted to Congress as part of his witness statement, right? So Matt Ford is officially tied to Lue at the hip in front of Congress in a very interesting way. And it's basically just kind of that video we just watched, but a little more surmised or whatever. Here's what it says. Written statement of Matthew Ford for the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Government Innovation, and National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs. Unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Let's put it. Monday, November 18th, 2024. Chairwoman Mace, Chairman Grothman, Ranking Members Connolly and Garcia, and members of the committee. I am Matthew Ford, an American journalist and host of the Good Trouble Show podcast. Today, I'm introducing damning information regarding the former director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I am a patriot who cares deeply about our nation's security above all. But above all, I care about the truth. In November of last year, journalists Chris Sharp, Josh Boswell, and I published a story in the Daily Mail exposing for the first time the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology's Office of Global Access and its classified UAP crash retrieval program. Probably should have pulled that, but it was kind of part of the Liberation Times thing too. Last weekend, Christopher Sharp published a follow-up article in the Liberation Times, providing further detail on how the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology operates its UAP-related crash recovery and reverse engineering programs through the Office of Global Access and CIA's Counter-Proliferation Mission Center. The head of the Directorate of Science and Technology serves as the primary gatekeeper of the entire UAP Deep Legacy program, overseeing operations such as detection of UAPs through classified platforms, recovery operations, disbursement of recovered craft to government agencies and private defense contractors, and protection of derived off-world technologies. My sources have alleged that, and so he posted these on Twitter the day before these were submitted, and these weren't blacked out, and he names Glenn Gaffney here. My sources have alleged that Glenn Gaffney, the former head of the Directorate of Science and Technology, is one of these gatekeepers. Last year, I revealed that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of AARO, had assembled a secret technical advisory group to counsel AARO. Following my story, Dr. Kirkpatrick confirmed the existence of this committee to members of Congress, but refused to disclose the members' identities. And remember, as we covered, Kirkpatrick said because of harassment. As of 2 weeks ago, my sources informed me that this classified advisory board continues to advise AARO. Multiple sources have confirmed that, I'm pretty sure this is Glenn Gaffney again, I should double check though. Glenn Gaffney, the former head of the Directorate of Science and Technology and gatekeeper of the UAP Legacy Program, was handpicked by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick to be on this advisory board. I must emphasize this. The most consequential person involved with the cover-up of non-human technology is advising the office which Congress has given a mandate to find it. This is an abomination in bold. This is unconstitutional in bold. And this is criminal, also in bold. Furthermore, this revelation is significant because of AARO's primary mission is to provide a means for government whistleblowers to make protected disclosures on classified UAP special access programs and controlled access programs to AARO and to its staff. The fact that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick chose as one of his primary advisors the very gatekeepers overseeing CIA-controlled UAP access programs raises serious questions about Dr. Kirkpatrick's true motives as the director of AARO. This reporting indicates that AARO may function as a flypaper operation, intercepting whistleblower testimony and feeding their identities back to the CIA. What's interesting here too is that they're accusing the CIA of being behind that Grush thing, which I personally attribute to Lue, but we'll come back to that another day. You have heard that there are whistleblowers who don't trust AARO. My sources have informed me that this is one of the reasons why. If the CIA intercepts their testimony before it reaches Congress, whistleblowers are in grave danger. I would love more information on this. They keep on throwing around this danger word, but I think we need some more concrete stuff. Therefore, I implore you to wield your subpoena powers against hostile witnesses such as, and then here he names Glenn Gaffney, of course, and then he also names the other two people Sullivan and someone else who was in that video we just listened to. He kind of links them all together, but Glenn Gaffney's the big bad. And former head of the CIA's Office of Director of Global Access, Glenn Gaffney, dozens of whistleblowers are depending on you. Thank you for your leadership and your attention to this urgent matter. What are your thoughts on this, Tim? This is in the Congressional record. This is part of Lue Elizondo's official Congressional testimony. After 7 years of Lue working to get in front of Congress, he has Matt Ford and this thing added to that statement. Any thoughts?
I think it would have more weight if it was Lue that was saying it, instead of Matt Ford, and I think there's an interesting perspective here too, because not to get off topic with it, but I mean, Corbell is also trying to submit something into the congressional record in a roundabout way that ended up not necessarily being part of it. But I wish it was necessarily Lue that was making these statements, because to me, if I was a congressperson, I would say, well, who is Matt Ford? He wasn't in front of us, and how much weight is behind this?
What the hell is the Good Trouble Show?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I'm glad you're a patriot, and they all say American journalist too, right? Isn't that like sort of this new tagline that they
Yeah, they're all about that.
But don't you think that there would be more weight if this was Lue that was doing it?
Oh yeah, 100%. And then again, but in a weird way, it kind of is Lue doing it. But it's also like, why doesn't why doesn't Lue just come out and say this? Like, why go through all this pageantry of having like Matt Ford release this statement at the last minute of the last hour that you could submit stuff?
And why are they? Do you think that was him necessarily blacking that out, or do you think that was Congress that was already going through and blacking that out?
That's a good point, because like I said, and I didn't pull it, you could go look at his Twitter. He posted this exact letter like the day before Lue added it to his thing with no blackouts. You could read all the names, right? So
yeah, I think I think Congress had gone through and they had blocked that out for publication.
Yeah. Very, very strange. Okay, I got a few more left. We spend so much time talking about him. Let's hear from Glenn Gaffney himself. Have you looked up any of his interviews or anything?
Oh yeah. I watched
probably this one you've seen, right?
Yes, yeah.
This was the big one. Here he kind of talks about his career with the CIA and with the In-Q-Tel, which we'll kind of talk about. But let's just kind of hear from the man, the myth, the legend himself, the one that Matt Ford and Lue Elizondo and Chris Sharp are accusing of being not like the big bad, right? Like this is probably the biggest bad they've ever named ever. He's still in charge of the gatekeeping. He prevented OSAP from getting UFOs. He's behind the current reprisals against whistleblowers that include physical threats, right? These are some pretty big accusations to be making in front of Congress, guys. This is
so unsuspecting too. I mean, with his picnic blanket shirt and blazer.
Right?
Yeah.
I spent 31 years in the U.S. intelligence community. Almost all of that doing science and technical analysis or tech development, developing new capabilities and being able to bring them forward into the foreign field to collect intelligence. Spent, like I said, 31 years in the U.S. intelligence community. I had the
Can you say which part of the intelligence community?
Yes, I had the great. So I was in the CIA for almost all of those years, except for 2, where I was at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Collection, which had oversight over the community's collection operations.
When you say collection, just for us, would you explain what
espionage operations?
That's kind of interesting, right? The way he says collections there. That makes me go, huh? You know?
Oh, this whole thing and all of his titles and everything, it does make you.
You can put the UFO label on him and like the UFO glasses frames, the shades, and be like, oh, that's kind of an interesting statement when I look at it through this lens. Yeah, he says I'm in charge of the collection and acquisition of like foreign. He basically says crash retrievals right here in a weird way. Let's go back a little bit.
Where I was at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Collection, which had oversight over the community's collection operations.
When you say collection, just for us, would you explain what
espionage operations against gathering secrets from other countries that meant to do us harm, but also intelligence operations to work counter narcotics, counter terrorism, and any one of a number of different things. So it was both the domestic agencies and the foreign agencies that.
Interesting. Also, that's like what Lue says he did too. I feel like Lue's gonna drop one day that like he was part of a crash retrieval program or something, because I don't know. I just hear those phrases.
Yeah, well, I wish Patel would know and have asked too. Like, is this like collections of like foreign weapons or materials, stuff like that too, to see if he would say something about that.
Why do I feel like Force for Good? If you looked at this thing, it's like a really small YouTube channel. I feel like this is his Matt Ford. Like we're watching 2 counter intel dudes use their like weird little artificial. And I like Chris Sharp, Matt Ford. I don't hate the guy, but we're watching 2 counter intel dudes use their like artificially created media assets to like kind of get the narratives out about each other and themselves. I find interesting. Did you look at this channel, Force for Good? It totally
yeah.
screams op to me, right?
Oh yeah, I was like, this is some weird CIA front, and the way that the guy even introduced the topic here, he was like specifically talking about like, um, supporting capitalism, and which I'm not against by any means, but it was like obviously some like corporate espionage like sounding
Yeah.
maneuver here. So it's really,
Oh, you know what we got to do? We
yeah.
got to AI enhance this. Watch if
I
we
know.
find
I
out
was just looking at that. I was
that's
like, what
Kirkpatrick or something. You know what I mean? That'd be funny. Okay, let's play this out.
I had the great good fortune during my time at CIA to eventually serve as the director of science and technology there, where I had responsibility for everything that we were doing on the science and technology front, from research all the way through development and then deployment and operations to collect intelligence.
That's something to
process that
FOIA there.
intelligence.
That would be something to FOIA, I think. That avenue. It's what specifically are they getting their hands into? And I'm wondering if it's the Pokemon company too. Maybe you'd find that out.
Yeah, no, totally, dude. Let me go back a little bit because that was interesting what he says there. Let's
technology front, from research all the way through development and then deployment and operations to collect intelligence, process that intelligence, use technology in the interpretation of that data or in the application of that data, as we would then give it to analysts within the CIA to do the analysis that they needed to do for the national security team.
When you left that, Glenn, you went on to look at science and technology and its impact, the positive impact in the world at large. What was that next phase of your
chat. Who's got the better suited up mouthpiece? Glenn Gaffney with this guy, Patel, or Lue Elizondo with Matt Ford? Let me know what you guys think.
So the next phase, after I retired from the federal government, was I joined a company called In-Q-Tel, which has been around for well over 25 years now.
This is really interesting, and this is where I went down a crazy rabbit hole last night, and kind of wanted to do this a few days ago, but I didn't really done the In-Q-Tel deep dive. But In-Q-Tel is super interesting, and he's going to frame it a certain way. But as my understanding of it is, it's the CIA's private investment firm that they created in like 1999 specifically. And we're going to cover a little bit more about them as we close out here. We're almost done, but that whole kind of In-Q-Tel thing, I think, is something worth looking into. We're going to cover some of the connections it has after this, but it's just fascinating. This person's an interesting career, interesting person to just look into, regardless of the UFO stuff. But now added that Lue Elizondo is accusing this guy of all this crazy shit, a whole another layer.
And they are a strategic investor, strategic tech investor. So you can think of it as a lot of times it's referred to as CIA's venture arm, which is not quite correct. But they are a strategic investor, not for profit, that looks at ready soon technology that has both economic or the potential for strong economic impact, as well as helping in the national security front. And so In-Q-Tel identifies those technologies, brings teams together of venture players who make an investment in that technology and then bring that technology forward, oftentimes with what we would call a work program or an evolutionary step that would modify the technology in a way that in many times makes it even more fitting for the economy or more fitting for national security.
And in the most recent work you're doing, how is that somewhat different from that?
So what I'm doing now, I'm working as the Chief Strategy Officer for a new not-for-profit called the Noble Reach Foundation. And what we do there is we are not investors. We are a team that does two things. We focus on tech translation, that we think we identify tech that's still in its research phase. And while the research is still going on, we bring teams of experts in former CEOs, folks who have been through the valley of death and translating research into technology, into product. We bring embedded experts in who have different experiences in key technical areas like biotech or in lasers or in AI, right? Machine learning. We'll find the right experts, bring them in, work with the research team, and put them on a path towards commercialization. But the technologies that we identify aren't just for the economy. We're also looking at ones that we think could have real social impact, right? And an impact for good. And so on the tech translation side of the house, that's what our focus is, and we're enjoying working with these teams and bringing them forward. And we've been successful with it in the last few years, which has been very gratifying. The other half of what we do as Noble Reach is the talent side. We serve as Noble Reach as a bridge between government, industry, and academia. And if you think about it from the tech translation side, government's funding research. They're funding us to come in and work with the research teams. Most of those are academic research teams, right? And then we're bringing that forward and connecting them in with industry. On the talent side, we're still acting as that bridge between those three. And we have a vision of creating a new cadre or a new interest in government service, in helping students, graduates, right, see the value and see their careers and see what they can do in their career that actually is mission oriented and helps move, right, some of these key missions forward, for the country and for our allies. And so we have a vision of, we talk about it going from why to wow, talking to students and talking with folks about, potential career or potential service.
All right. So right off the bat, he doesn't seem like a total absolute piece of shit, right? Like they're trying to turn, and maybe that's just, I fell for the Lue trap. I'm not above falling for a CIA counter intel charisma bomb, but I don't know. What do you think? Just from this interaction alone, what we heard him say about his career, what he does, some of the stuff kind of checks out that you would think for UFOs, but Matt Ford and Lue are saying like this motherfucker is like low-key murdering, and they're not actually saying it, but they're kind of implying that he's behind the physical threats and reprisals that these whistleblowers are facing. Pretty interesting dichotomy, right?
Oh, sure. Well, he essentially said he's gatekeeping technology, about what the public needs to know in a way too. So I think it's interesting. And if you read through what he's saying, it sounds exactly like the narrative that we've heard since Corso, talking about the recovery from Roswell and stuff like that, and creating fiber optics and Kevlar and all of this stuff, but giving them to other companies and allowing them to try to digest it and figure out what it can be used for and how it can help industry in some way. So part of me thinks, okay, well, maybe they do have these materials that they are trying to figure out how to keep it within a private sector and only allow what they want and still make a profit off of it, to come out to the public. It's sort of interesting.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. And again, have my feelings about Lue, but naming this motherfucker in front of Congress and like being like, this is the guy, it's a pretty big deal, guys. Whatever you feel about Lue, TTSA, the whole disclosure movement, this is a milestone we've reached here, and I don't think people have quite yet realized it, how big of a deal it was that Lue and Matt and the boys are naming this guy. We're like, this is the ultimate big bad now. They have never named somebody, they've never attributed the things they've attributed to anyone like they have this man recently. So, you should just reach out to him. I need to start doing that more. I need to reach out.
Did you ever see when did he actually move into the private sector? Did you ever see like a date specifically for that?
No, I should have looked at it more. But even then though, is that even a thing, right? Because according to them, he's advising these guys 2 weeks ago. Like, he might be private sector, sure, but he's still part of the government cover-up, according to Lue and Matt Ford and the boys, right?
Well, that's what I was trying to see. It was like maybe that would be like a hole in their statement that they're saying there. But we'll get into it more when you start talking about the company for Pokemon Go. But from what I've heard too in this last election cycle and stuff, is that the CIA is really moving into this like private contracting firm, and one of them is Peter Thiel specifically with like Palintir, and the CIA is essentially contracting them for that too. So we'll kind of get into it. So maybe he's still, the old saying is that you never leave the CIA. So my guess is
also applies to Lue, right?
Yes, exactly,
Lue, guys. Also applies. Okay, let's continue along here. This is some interesting thing I found. This guy, I don't know if it's true or not. I reached out to this guy for more info. He says, I reached out to Glenn Gaffney, he helps with the CIA DDS&T 2009 to 2011, right during the OSIP years. He asked me what I wanted to discuss. I asked a simple yes/no question. Where were you approached by Dr. K and his team at AARO for their historic report? He didn't reply. I followed up and still nothing. So, let's just take this guy at face value. I was unable to verify it, but he did initially respond, and then when the question actually came, he just went cold. I do find that kind of interesting. We can't really take people in the chat are also saying Lue's always looking to blame someone. James McPherson says that. E Talkin says it's easy to name a retired guy. Those are good points too, right? Also, kind of like another thing we see with Lue with the Harry Reid letter. How convenient is it that one of the main people that could validate this story is dead now, right? Did you pick up on that with the whole Liberation Times and the other CIA guy who was trying to get the parts from Lockheed to OSAP?
Yeah.
Right, he's dead now, which it sucks, unfortunate, but it's also kind of like,
well, you can't ask him.
You can't ask him, right? Now you could just attribute all these stuff to all these dead and retired people, like you're kind of good to go. Although it would take some real freaking cojones for Lue to be putting this in front of Congress without there being something here, I'd say, because he doesn't have to, right? If there was nothing here, he doesn't have to. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it's that Lue's got almost like a plausible deniability where he's like, well, I didn't say it. Someone else is saying it. I just had submitted it within the record. But
just almost like it's so weird. Like, just come out and say it.
I know. It's just weird that he's not the one that's saying it too. I don't know. There's that's such a strange maneuver to try to pull with that. And like I said, there's not a lot of weight when it comes from a podcaster.
Yeah. Even if it is Matt Forward of the Good Trouble Show. Okay, what do we got next? So the last few things are just going to be about In-Q-Tel. I got like 2 more slides, I think. I just found this super fascinating. Again, so this is the CIA's private investment firm created in 1999. This is just their kind of like PR promo. I thought it'd be interesting to see them. Then we got RFK Jr. speaking about it. And then the last slide is just some of their companies. And as we've been alluding to, Pokemon Go is one of them, which is just such a fascinating little tidbit of information. But here's In-Q-Tel by their own words. Let's see how they view themselves. Like a recent promo they put out. 25 years.
Creativity, ingenuity, adaptability, superpowers that drive innovation. In the late 1990s, bold entrepreneurs backed by forward-thinking investors were shaping the internet and changing the future course of society. Geopolitical horizons were changing too. As the Cold War faded, novel threats emerged. Technology would be key to tackling these new challenges. Visionary leaders at the Central Intelligence Agency saw this fast-moving landscape and knew they had to bridge the gap between government and the innovation powerhouse of Silicon Valley. Their solution was In-Q-Tel.
We learned today that the Central Intelligence Agency is going to start investing in the internet. The CIA is not trying to make money, apparently. Rather, it's trying to figure out how it can make sense.
That's fun, right? The Central Intelligence Agency is going to invest in the internet, but they're not going to try and make money. Okay, we're going to learn. Yeah.
Of all the intelligence it is gathering.
In-Q-Tel's creators laid the foundations that guide us. Unwavering dedication to the mission needs of our government partners. Deep commitment to identifying and evaluating cutting-edge commercial technologies. A powerful model that leverages innovation for maximum impact. Since 1999, we've connected venture-backed startups with the national security community, an approach that has made our world more secure. Great ideas grow. Over 25 years, IQT has transformed into a unique global investment platform with unparalleled capabilities. We're tireless tech scouts, constantly seeking brilliant entrepreneurs with groundbreaking products. We're experts in technology transfer, speeding innovations into the hands of those who urgently need them. And we're beyond the horizon explorers, keeping our partners ahead of adversaries by alerting them to tomorrow's breakthroughs. We constantly scan the edge of what's possible. Cybersecurity, AI, space, biotech, quantum. Critical and emerging
Those
tech
all sound like
frontiers that are
UFOs.
ever-changing.
I know. All of those UFOs flying around too. It's like all in space. I think it's like biotechnology. That's interesting.
Great ADHD Chicken says, Jesus, anyone else getting dystopian future vibes off this? Friend of the show, Coin Exchange says this In-Q-Tel promo has UAP written all over it. It really does. It has some kind of interesting vibes going on here.
Since 1999, we've met with more than 15,000 early stage companies, made over 750 investments, deploying a total of more than $1.3 billion. And most important of all, helped our government partners adopt almost 500 transformative technologies. The stories of our mission impact just keep adding up.
By the way, great score In-Q-Tel. I feel like I'm in like the climax of like DreamWorks movie with like Hans Zimmer, dude. This is a beautiful score that you guys have here. And look at all the companies they're part of. We're going to go into more detail here in a bit. But the other thing I want to say too is, I don't want to just always show them like, there's this element of like, we could try and be as good as we want, but like China and Russia are going to do dirty shit. And obviously that could be used to do bad shit like the UFO cover up. But like, I don't know, on the premise, what are your thoughts on this? Maybe we'll let it finish out and you could think of your response. But like, our government has to kind of have a finger in this stuff. It makes sense why they do. Obviously, I think it's been used for some pretty bad stuff, but I don't know. It's just kind of this weird trade-off that exists in this world right now. Very strange, but okay.
In this era of light-speed technological and geopolitical change, new threats will keep emerging. Our role is as crucial today as when we were founded. Wherever there are uncharted technology frontiers, that's where you'll find us. The rise of artificial intelligence,
oh my God.
The commercialization of space, the promise of synthetic biology. We will help our nation and its allies win on these and other battlefields of the innovation wars, and will already be anticipating the next ones. Outstanding entrepreneurs are everywhere. Our mission takes us to the furthest reaches of the planet, uncovering game-changing technologies, unearthing unexpected insights, and forging deep and trusted partnerships. Today, the communities we convene at the intersection of entrepreneurship, venture capital, and government are stronger than ever. We see proof of that in each and every one of you, this unique collective of innovative thinkers and doers. Though unprecedented challenges lie ahead, together we can make the globe a safer and better place. The world will never stand still, and neither will we.
I'm crying because of that score. It was so beautiful. That's pretty.
Those graphics were insane.
Yeah. Here, let's listen to RFK Jr. kind of give us the other take on In-Q-Tel. I like that we get their take first, and then we'll go to RFK Jr. Did you hear? Dude, have you heard this clip of him going around that he was like, he's just openly casual about like his heroin use back in the day? Pretty wild. Yeah. I did not know that about him. But okay, let's listen to him on In-Q-Tel.
And so it was seductive to them. But everybody, Congress, when they first voted it in place, Congress, both political parties said, if we create this thing, it could turn into a monster and it could undermine our values. And today it's so powerful, and then nobody knows what its budget is. Plus, it has its own investment fund, In-Q-Tel, which has invested, made, I think, 2,000 investments in Silicon Valley. So it has ownership of a lot of these tech companies that, and a lot of the CEOs of those tech companies have signed state secrecy agreements with the CIA, which if they even reveal that they have signed that, they can go to jail for 20 years and have their assets removed, etc. So the influence that the agency has, the capacity to influence events at every level in our country is really frightening. And then for most of its...
So yeah, you kind of got to give it to the intelligence community. They saw the writing on the wall with like the internet age, and they went this route. And here's our last slide here, just a little more on In-Q-Tel. So
that goes back to even the start of the CIA, really. And when you think of the Dulles brothers, I mean, they were essentially hedge fund people on Wall Street, and what their interests really were for protecting businesses with commodities and materials. So like, trying to get cheap bananas from Nicaragua and like creating, overthrown government there to control that resource. And and then it started moving to more war sectors and other stuff like that too. So it's nothing. If anything, they're just branching out into a new.
They're just adapting, right, to the modern. They're just doing what they've always done on the modern thing, right? Which is what they're really good at. And also something I want to point out too. I kind of love that RFK Jr. is this woke on In-Q-Tel because with Trump in office and him kind of being part of the administration, as with these if In-Q-Tel's up to some UFO shit, you know what I mean? RFK seems like the perfect guy at the perfect spot to be kind of taking this effort in. So that's cool.
Well, I mean, his whole family has been, targeted by CIA groups for, I mean, his father and then, his uncle for sure, I think he's more skeptical of them than anything. And I enjoy hearing him when he's outspoken against those entities and kind of sounding an alarm about sort of a power control they have.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, like, not many people could claim like, and if I ever talk to Lue, I really would love to ask Lue. And if any of you guys ever talk to Lue, ask him about the Alpha 66 JFK connection, because there's something there. And the fact that Lue did his last tour at the Dallas, Texas theater. Okay, this is a little run on. We'll just close out here. So In-Q-Tel, some other interesting things I found out about In-Q-Tel. It was founded by a former Lockheed Martin CEO, this guy Norm Augustine, in 1999. So that's kind of interesting, right? A CIA Lockheed Martin guy founded this
Super
investment
interesting.
firm.
Super
Right?
interesting.
And there's always this discussion, right, with UFO stuff going back to the 70s of like divesting stuff into the private industry so it's unfoyable. So the fact that we have a Lockheed guy being at the forefront of this thing, which as RFK Jr. said, that and this is where it gets kind of fishy because there's a lot of gray area about this. These are some confirmed In-Q-Tel things, but there is kind of like what RFK Jr. said, where there's certain companies who like they're not even allowed to talk about it, and if they do, they get all their assets seized and go to jail. And so that leaves there's people who say Facebook's In-Q-Tel, Twitter's In-Q-Tel, everything's In-Q-Tel. People say Mr. Beast's mom worked for In-Q-Tel, right? That's something that I saw online that I wasn't able to verify. What I could verify, though, is that Elon Musk in 2002, when he was looking for investors in Russia, here's this picture. He's joined by Michael Griffin, who was COO of In-Q-Tel at the time, or around that time, right? Because some people say, again, this is another one where people say, like, well, SpaceX, that's all an In-Q-Tel op. That's all a CIA op. How did SpaceX get all this funding in 2002 when they didn't have any, like, prototype rockets or anything like that? Now, I couldn't find anything that directly said that, but I did find this picture, right? So this is kind of interesting that Elon Musk is kind of in bed with In-Q-Tel. And again, Elon Musk was part of PayPal. Elon Musk has been around kind of the Silicon Valley thing. And as we heard RFK Jr. say, these In-Q-Tel people, they have contracts where you can't say anything or else you lose it all. So I'm not accusing Elon of that here, but did you know about this little foray thing here before we continue to the more fun one, obviously Pokemon Go and Google Earth? But what do you think about
I
that?
don't know about that, but is that Augustine in the background of that photo too? Is he sitting on that couch back there?
Oh shoot, maybe it is, huh? This one?
Yeah.
It kind of looks like it might be. He's drinking a Diet Coke. That's a good catch. Let me see if I can make this one bigger. But yeah, that's it. Maybe we'll see. Maybe I can't tell.
No, I
Similar
don't think it is.
shape and similar balding pattern.
Yeah.
This
Yeah, I
looks
don't
like the
think
most
so.
recent pick, I think. So
Oh, so
picture
maybe
this
it
minus
was.
20 years. Kind of maybe.
It could be, honestly. Yeah.
Huh.
That'd be interesting to look into.
Yeah. Okay. So then on top of that, we have one of their big things that they've been into lately is quantum computing, and we hear about this a lot in UFO land. And actually, we got to get our boy Deep Prasad some In-Q-Tel money. That was my other thing. I was like, how can we get In-Q-Tel money? Because this seems to be where all the big money's at, and where you get some of the secrets. So if anyone has any good ideas on how we could get some In-Q-Tel money, please let me know. All right, the big fun one, Pokemon Go. Yes, one of the companies that In-Q-Tel, the CIA's investment firm, invested in early on, has a lot of shares in, would go on to make Pokemon Go. And even just as recently as like this past week, there was new documents that revealed that like they were using this for like geospatial analysis and like mapping out basically like the thing from The Dark Knight Rises or whatever that Morgan Freeman has, that like super AI computer that can map
where
everything out.
every phone turns into a like echolocation, and you can get imagery for everything that's happening there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I find it hilarious because, dude, Pokemon Go is such a fad. Shouts out the CIA for that one. They killed it. Whoever came up with this one killed it. I remember when this came out, dude, I was still in college. it was like insane, bro. There was such like a beautiful unity vibe in the air. People just going out doing this stuff, and all who would have known the whole time you're just helping the CIA map the world. Also, another one is Google Earth. They were one of the early investors of like this company that would go on to make Google Earth and Google Maps and all that stuff. I think in association with like the NGAO and NRO. And John Ramirez has actually talked about this a little bit too. So there are these trickle out things that come out to the private or to the public sector from like CIA ops. I think another one that they've talked about is fiber optics, which is interesting when you think about Corso. In-Q-Tel has a lot of fiber optic stuff in their resume, or whatever you want to call it, their portfolio.
Well, Corso's like basic message originally was saying exactly what we're talking about here, is that they've at that time, which makes me wonder too if the 1950s that transition of it is like when it started to really happen then, but that they're giving this technology to different companies and saying figure it out, you can own the rights to it and everything, but tell us what you know about it. And maybe they don't really tell them where they got it from. They're hinting that it's maybe a Russian or Chinese or something like that, and then giving them the free range to try to digest it and figure out how it could be used within industry.
Yeah, and another thing that they're big on is social media mapping and network mapping and AI stuff, like you said there. Last thing here, and this is our last slide. So Palintir, early big investors in Palintir. Now this ties in Peter Thiel, who's all connected to Trump. Palintir is like basically
and Elon.
Yeah, what's your assessment of what Palintir is? Because it's kind of like all these things, but like I don't know. What's your read on that?
Okay, well, so Palintir got into really more into the lexicon, I would say, within the last year, because they had helped Israel with the Where's Daddy system, which was a way for them to be able to track people via phone and figuring out certain people's movements, and they could track them to figure out when they would actually get to their house, and then they would launch a bomb and blow up that home there. So what I know, one aspect of Palintir is they're in the digital scape, and that they're able to track people's information, via their phones, or computing systems as well. So they've specialized in that.
Yeah, very interesting. And as you said, it ties in Elon. Now it also ties in, like I said, Peter Thiel, Trump. I saw people online saying this. I could not find any evidence of it, but people were saying that In-Q-Tel is actually tied up in Enigma, which honestly would not surprise me at all. I just couldn't find any evidence of that. There's also a lot of really big rumors and allegations that Peter Thiel is involved with Enigma Labs. Again, that's that new UFO reporting app, which when a data point people drop is that, I don't know if you remember this, AARO had like a really early like no bid contract with Enigma. Do you remember that? So people were
interesting.
Pointing to that like, oh, interesting. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if In-Q-Tel and Enigma are linked up. I'm not saying it, don't sue me. But it totally seems like something they would do. And again, you guys, there's a lot of gray area around this. Like I said, there's people online who are like 100% sure that Zuckerberg is like In-Q-Tel. Like, Peter Thiel was an early investor of Facebook. But like as RFK Jr. said, a lot of these companies have like, they're not allowed to talk about it, So yeah.
A big speculation was when Elon had acquired X or Twitter at that time, is that Thiel was also a backer of it, that he was like a financial backer for it as well. And I haven't looked into that a ton, but it sounded like that Thiel was someone who was also interested in making sure that Elon could acquire that, which my guess is there's another reason why, Twitter is part of Elon's, umbrella systems now too, because I don't really think I think a lot of things with Elon Musk, and I think there's other motives about why he wanted to get X. So that's my thing. And just to kind of talk about the Peter Thiel thing too, and I like Jesse Michaels, and I like the things that he puts out, but he's got a connection to Thiel too, and it has always been in the back of my mind, what is, if there's another motive that comes.
Well, are you familiar with the whole like? Oh, actually, real quick, I want to address this, and then I'm going to say what I was going to say. Eric says might be explained why allegedly they gave Tupa fake names, and he's referring to Enigma, friend of the show, Tupa Cabra, my brother in Christ. He was like, he made like round 4 interviews with Enigma, and then he later found out after the fact that they all gave him fake names and acted like they were real. Wow, very strange, and they wanted to buy the timeline from him. So that's kind of a little sus. What were you saying after that though too?
Oh well. So talking about like Jesse and stuff. And,
Oh yeah. So are you familiar with like the whole Peter Thiel theory that like the whole intellectual dark web? And actually, Tupa, if you want to hop in here, I'm gonna just send it to you. Maybe if you've been listening, you could. I'm sending this to you on Twitter, Tupa. If you want to hop in here for that last thing, give us the Enigma spiel. Let the people know. But are you familiar with the whole idea that like Tim Dillon and Tim Pool and maybe even Joe Rogan and like this whole kind of what's the word? There's a word for them. I forgot what it's called. But they're all kind of like in a roundabout way an op of like Peter Thiel. Have you ever heard that theory? And again, I'm not saying that for sure, but like it's been a Red Scare. The Red Scare podcast is another good example of this, where people say that like these are just straight up like people that are pushing a narrative. And again, you know, you can't really like some of the stuff Peter Thiel says I do like, especially coming out of like this whole woke media landscape. But like, you know, they find these influencers that put out a message that they like or that resonates with them, and then they just pump up their Patreons and get them here and get them there. And like, it would seem like it's a natural thing, but if you actually really look a little bit deeper, it's like, oh, all of these people pushing this kind of thing are all funded by like In-Q-Tel. You know what I mean? Basically, yeah.
I didn't hear that with Tim Dillon, but that sort of makes sense because he would always talk about kind of tech people that he'd be playing squash with or like doing other things.
The intellectual dark web is the term it was, and then you kind of see it too with this past election. You know, like who's like JD Vance is on Tim Dillon and Trump's on Tim Dillon, and you know it's an interesting way. And again, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but people need to just be aware of the media landscape. And I think we see it, right? You could even see it in the UFO field. Like, how artificial is this thing? And I like Jesse Michaels, by the way, but I do think those are valid things to be thinking about. He does have a connection to Peter Thiel.
Sure.
Peter Thiel, you know what I mean?
Well, so you know, the other thing I'm trying to remember what I was going to say here specifically, but I was going to bring up, who's that one like magician guy? He just came out with like a video with like Jesse Michaels where they went to like the hearing and stuff. What was that guy's name? Chris something or do you know who I'm talking about? He's like a Canadian YouTuber.
Is that the one that Jeremy Corbell like weirdly shouted out?
Yeah.
Okay, I saw that. I saw that Jeremy Corbell's weird. I don't even know what the hell that was, but yes.
Okay, so part of me was like, how did those guys get front row seats? You know, and if you watch that video too, what is brought up is that they made a last minute trip to go to DC to be part of that, and then I'm trying to. There's a guy. If you see, you'll see him there too. Jesse's had him on a couple of episodes as well, where he was like a photographer at that hearing. He's like sitting on the floor there, and what is that guy's YouTube channel?
Yes Theory.
Yes Theory. Yeah.
I was invited to that Grush one, by the way. I just couldn't at the time, and I was dealing with some other stuff. But I was excited to do it. Yeah.
For this recent hearing, he was there as well for it, but he was on the floor where all the photographers are to take photographs and stuff. And part of me is like, how did he get the credentials to do that? Because I feel like, I think that takes time to like get like your press pass and all of that to be able to.
Yeah. Or how about also too, like we see this like with even Lex Friedman, I think might even fall in that camp. Or I like Julian Dory too, right? But there's these CIA assets that do all the podcast rounds too, like that Mike Baker guy. Who's the other one that's on Julian Dory's show all the time and is now part of Skinwalker Ranch? Andrew Bustamante. I've seen people online say that he wears a wig. That's not even like his real hair and stuff. I don't know.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know, but there is definitely a weird like intel, and we see it 100% in the UFO community.
Right.
How many of the UFO podcasts are in tight with Lue Elizondo, a counter intel agent who's like directly involved with the harassment of their peers? You know what I mean? Like we see it, and it's just kind of interesting thing. I don't know. A little bit of a tangent.
The other thing I was going to say too is that JD Vance is hooked up with Thiel. You know, he was like
yes,
a lawyer for him or something. Like
Thiel funded his campaign, his Senate campaign.
Right.
There was two Senate. What was the other guy's name? There was two Senate campaigns that Thiel went all in on. I don't know if the other guy won. I kind of like that guy too. He was a little more, I don't know, but he was chill. But yeah, no, it's the intersection of politics, social media, narrative control, intelligence agency. You guys can act like it's a part of the reality we live in, and I'd rather be knowing about it and informed about it. Right? Like, aren't you glad you guys know, if you didn't know before today, that Pokemon Go was you were helping the CIA map out the world? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you just got to be aware of these things.
Well, the Corbett report, I remember years ago, he had covered that Pokemon Go, when it came out, and talking about that. I wish I could remember that episode, but you know, talking about how it was like a CIA sort of front. And I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that when they're moving into these private areas like that, they're not FOIA accessible. So
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
they're totally untraceable at that point, or what connections they have with all of that.
Yeah. All right. So we got a little bit off there, but closing thoughts. Elizondo names Glenn Gaffney, UFO Gatekeeper. After everything we did, and even I think it was cool to go back and look with a fresh set of eyes of like some of the older stuff of Matt Forward and last year naming Kirkpatrick and all that stuff. What are your thoughts, dude? This is a pretty big development that I think has yet to really fully take hold of the UFO community. Like, this is a big name, big accusation being dropped at, and pretty much the biggest stage in front of Congress by like the guy, Lue Elizondo. And when we looked at his resume, there's some stuff that would lead me to believe maybe he's telling the truth, but I don't know. What are your thoughts, Tim? Closing thoughts here.
Yeah, I think it makes the waters muddy, and we pointed out some things where I think Lue was totally true talking about the divestment, and I think it's interesting that he's trying to use the same playbook he used to justify his position as AARO, or not AARO, ATIP director, where he was trying to get an email or some sort of statement from the Pentagon confirming that this divestment was trying to happen, and never really went through or anything like that. So he was trying to get some sort of proof or some sort of email to happen, and it makes you wonder if Mellon was sort of behind that as well. But it's definitely interesting threads, and there's more of it unraveling as it's happening. In the same sense here with Gaffney, and I've heard you talk about it as well with Ken Klippenstein and that whole event that had happened. But did you know that Ken Klippenstein's dad, his name is Steven Klippenstein, and he works for the Department of Energy?
Yeah,
And
I did hear that. Yeah.
he like focuses specifically on like molecular chemistry for like combustion and stuff like that too. So it just makes you really curious whether or not the narrative of the government trying to hold on, there's part of the government that's trying to hold on to this for select businesses, and creating an area for them to still have control over these properties, if it's true. But it's fascinating, and we'll see how it keeps developing as it comes out. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And or go for it real quick. Is that?
oh, no, I didn't have much to say. No.
I resonate with James McPherson here. If it is Elizondo, if he tells the truth about anything, it isn't for the right reasons. Yeah, I know, dude. I just getting this info from Elizondo and Matt Ford, it just taints it all for me. And even if it's right, I'm just like, why do you got to add the kissy face emoji to it? Why do you got to be all cringe about it? Like, it's a weird time to be alive. But I mean, again, these are big accusations. We're gonna keep following it. This is huge. Let me know if you guys think this guy's the gatekeeper or not in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe. Tim might be starting a channel soon. As soon as he does, if he does, we're totally going to be plugging that on all my stuff. Follow my backup channel. It's going to be lit for more of these. Although this one is kind of long. this is like a 2-hour stream. But yeah, I don't know. Any other last closing thoughts before I close down here?
Well put together piece. Thanks for having me too. It was fun.
Thanks, Tim. All right, man. I'm going to close it out. Thanks to the chat, everyone, all the new mods here. We'll see you guys probably in a Twitter space. I'm going to be clipping some of that Ivan Hanel space. Have a good night, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Hell yeah.